right, so I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit today about how to handle cups. So we don't want to just stick, the whole semester with cylinders. They're one of the most challenging things that we do. And I think, honestly, some things about this process you might find easier. Okay, so I have 2 pieces of clay here. Both are about 1.5 pounds, so I'm going a little bit less for the cup than I am for the cylinder. Now, you can do, like a 2-pound cup, and it won't be 2 pounds by the time you fire it. There's a lot of water, that's in it. But I want to go a little bit daintier, maybe, but if you want like a nice big, kind of like cup, if it's like a cup, go with 2 pounds. So I'd say little tiny teacups, probably about 1 pound, anything, kind of in mid-size, 1.5 pounds or so will be what I'd recommend. Now, one of these pieces of clay I'm going to leave for my handles, and then I'm going to throw with the other. We're going to get my clay down, same kind of slap we've done before. Okay, once again, as you get better and better at centering, it's going to get faster for you. Okay. All right, so fairly well centered now. Okay, getting ready to go in. And I would recommend, you should probably look up, some shapes of thrown mugs and cups. You want to avoid things that are just like mold made. A lot of like those really pretty china cups are just made of molds. They're not really thrown. Get a sense of like what the overall shapes can be, because here we're going to be not only applying, the reason why we did the cylinder is not just because I'm like, oh, I just want to torture you. It teaches you a lot about controlling the clay, and I'm going to bring that into this process, right? But also, we're going to shape here. We get to be a little bit more creative in what we're doing. We want to get that control first, and then start applying, sort of our own vision of things. All right, so let me turn this off because this one, like I said, is moody. Okay, give it that little check. Okay, and I'm sticking with, kind of going that same kind of like distance that I was doing before, like about 1/4 inch. You could leave it a little bit thicker because you can trim these, or you can go down, about the same or a little bit thinner, because you can just, leave a flat bottom on your cups. Okay, I'm going to do the curl, start to bring it out. Just work on my inside and flatten out that bottom, just like I did with cylinder. So you notice this part of the process is exactly the same as what we've been doing, right? And it's going to show up again and again and again and again. And that's why I focus on it so much at first, not to, like I said, make you miserable, but because it is so essential to everything else that we do. Okay, so now ready to start bringing up the walls. So I'm going to do a little bit of just cylinder building first. Same as what I've done before. Maybe another pull. Let's see here. You don't want to go overly thin if you're doing a cup, because you will be doing some shaping from here. Unless if you just want to straight up and down, which is totally fine. A lot of mugs are made that way, right? Now you also, remember when I talked about controlling this edge, right? You really want to compress that, because getting too thin on your edge, especially if you're putting, if you're making something to go on the lips, you don't want it to feel sharp, right? At all. Okay, now I still feel a little air bubble in there, so I'm going to show you guys a little trick. If you are getting, has anybody felt an air bubble in their clay, like a little lump? Yep. It's okay. Well, what you can do, if you stop your wheel, and I would rotate it for a while. I think it's just sitting over here. You can find where it is. You could poke a little hole with your needle tool in it a couple of times and then get it going, and usually that'll release it. And if it's big, you can just kind of press it just a tiny touch. You know, don't touch it too much because that can mess up the overall pot. Okay. There we go. There we go, and let me see how my thickness feels. I always check my walls just a little bit. And remember, you know, you can also, you know, if you're wanting things a little straighter, shaped a little differently, you can always push in a little bit towards your fingers with the rib tools, and that will compress the clay particles, make them a little stronger if things are feeling a little weaker. Help to control your overall form, right? Okay, so I could just leave this and be like, that's a mug, you know, but maybe I want to shape it a little bit, and I've left it kind of thick for that purpose, you know, like a little thicker mug can be kind of good, you know. You don't want to be super duper thick, but it's more insulating, you know, if you like drink a lot of hot coffee. For me, I drink a lot of like iced coffee, so it doesn't really matter to me necessarily too much. So I'm going to worry about like more aesthetics, and I'm going to think about like maybe more of my shaping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the 5 o'clock position, just like I did in the cylinder, right? But instead of like pulling up more clay or a lot more right now, I'm going to go ahead and do a push and pull between my fingers. So if I want to come out, I'm going to push from my fingers, you know, on the inside out, using my outside fingers as a wall. If I want to go in a little bit, then I'm going to go ahead and use my fingers from the outside and then go back to using these fingers as just a light support system. I always want to have that support system in place. So I'm going to go ahead and curve out a little bit. Let me get this wet again. Got a little too much traction. Notice I really sopped that. Okay, so going ahead and just adding a little curve. Okay, I like it a little chubbier out here. Notice too when you get better at centering, look at how much less clay I have down here. But as you get better at it and you go faster, then you're going to lose less clay. Now here I'm going to come out, I'm going to flare this a little bit by putting my finger on the outside and kind of putting an angle at it and curling out just a touch. There we go. A little chubbier here. I do feel a little thick. Let's see here. So a little more in there. And I can, you know, try other things too. I can push out above and then push in below. Create little marks like that. I kind of like mugs that are shaped like that because then there's a place to kind of grip with your fingers. I've also had friends that'll kind of slow down the wheel a lot and they'll just kind of go through it with like a finger or put a little dent in it for their thumb. More of kind of a Asian tea bowl style. And collar in, I talked about this term before. You all like just coming in a little bit because I think this is a little bit wide. And notice I'm watching from my sides so I can get a sense of like my overall shaping. There we go, that's better. I think actually I'm going to bring this in a little bit and bring this out below. Because if I did want to, let's see, down a little. And also make a little rim by, once again, like, you know, kind of juxtapositioning your fingers. Like I'm going to, you know, push up here on the edge and then come down here a little bit with my fingernail. Like a little honey pot almost. And also get in here with some tools, help define things. And smooth that a little bit. And then I'm just going to feel for my bottom, make sure everything feels nice and even down here. Nothing feels like off. Maybe just smooth a little bit more. Okay, now remember, you know, sort of final steps, and this was something I mentioned too with the cylinders, is you want to get, you know, your water out from the inside, right? So always take your sponge, wring it out, get into that. once I have my overall form and I'm happy with that, yeah, take out any of that excess water on the inside. Okay, and whether you're going to, we do a process called trimming in a lot of pottery, where we wait for it to get to leather hard. You know, the next step right now is raw clay. It's super flexible. Leather hard, some of you may have already noticed it if you've kept some of your projects, you know, goes to a stiffer point, but it's not quite dry. You know, it could still possibly bend if you really crunched it, or you could carve into it, you know, without creating dust. That's in a second step. And then there's bone dryer greenware, which is like totally dry. All the water that's around the clay particles has evaporated. Super duper fragile. If you try to scratch from it, it's going to create clay dust. You know, that's kind of the point where you put things in the kiln usually, right? So right now I have raw clay. When I get to leather hard, I can trim this, but I'm not quite there. My grad school professor showed this to me, you know, kind of first. Now, it's a good technique, I think, for either if you want to prepare, you know, for the process of trimming, or if you want to leave like a pot like this. Now, bowls and stuff I would always trim. Cup you can get away with not necessarily trimming it, but I'm going to show you what she taught me. She taught me to throw down a little bit. Okay, so what she would do is she'd take like her finger, get it really controlled. Notice how my elbow's in, right? And she'd just kind of push in, and then just bring her finger down a little bit. And notice how like much cleaner that looks right in there. And then sometimes she would even take tools, like put a little line in there or something. The wooden tool's handy for this. Okay, and then she would go in and trim, you know, and take off the excess. So for me, I'm going to leave, this is kind of a simple looking pot. I'm going to go ahead and I want to give it a little foot, you know, that I'm going to trim eventually. So I'm going to just go ahead, push into that a little bit there. Now you can always use, remember, you can take this down like a pencil, you know, get into here, separate out, make a little moat. And then you can really slow down your wheel and just take off that excess right there. But I kind of like this tool. These are actually my personal ones, I think. So little tip down here does the same thing, just a little more efficiently, because then I can just drag it back. And then I can even come under it just a little bit. There we go. And that's going to make my job of trimming later so much easier. A lot of times beginners, and really even, you know, me up until my grad school professor taught me to do that, would leave like big uneven edges, and then it's really hard to discern like the shape for trimming. This makes it a lot easier. So now I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to cut underneath it, turn off this wheel. Now I want to make sure my wheels are turned off for my next step. Now, if I wasn't doing like the, you know, like Rachel Ray or, you know, like cooking show kind of deal where it's like, oh, let me show you this and now it's finished, you know, I would probably put this, you know, let it firm up just a little bit, put it under a loose bag, let it get, you know, to leather hard over maybe a day or two. And then somewhere in between that section, like maybe tomorrow or something, I would go ahead and pull my handles, you know, because they're going to dry out a little quicker than the pot will, because they're not going to have as much water introduced to them, and they're not usually, you know, as much mass here too. So, because what I'm going to do next, I'm going to put my pot to the side, and what I do next is really much more manual than, you know, this process. So I'm not needing the wheel to spin, which means if I'm putting my water bucket up for what I'm about to do on the top of here, I definitely want the wheel off, right? So make sure you turn it off before you do it, because you don't want to hit that and send the wheel bucket flying, hitting your neighbor, soaking everybody ends up electrocuted. They're writing tragic stories about us, you know, in the newspaper. Okay, all right.